The sun doesn't just rise over our house. It bleeds through the sheer linen curtains I spent 3 months picking out, hitting the honey-toned hardwood floors that Mark and I spent our entire first year of marriage refinishing by hand. You know that smell of old sawdust and lemon wax? That's the smell of our success. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., the house felt like a sanctuary. It was quiet enough to hear the house settling, a gentle creak in the floorboards that sounded like the building itself was breathing with us. I would stand there in the kitchen, my bare feet pressing against the cool marble of the island, watching the steam curl off my coffee. It was the only 20 minutes of the day where I wasn't a freelance designer under a deadline or a wife with a mortgage. I was just a person in a space I had earned. I remember looking at Mark that Tuesday morning. He was leaning against the doorframe, his hair still messy from sleep, holding his mug like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He looked at me with this soft, tired smile and said, "We actually did it, didn't we? No roommates, no landlords, just us and the quiet." I laughed, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and told him that if he didn't get in the shower, he'd be late for the firm, and the quiet would be replaced by the sound of his boss yelling. We were happy. We were deeply, fundamentally stable. Or so I thought. The phone call came at 10:42 a.m. I was in my home office, the one with the big bay window that looks out over the hydrangea bushes. The caller ID said Eleanor, and my stomach did that tiny, familiar flip, a mix of daughter-in-law guilt and the instinctive need to brace for impact. When I answered, there was no hello. There was only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing and the sharp metallic clatter of things being shoved into a suitcase. She sounded breathless, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. She told me, "They're telling me I have to leave, Maya. The building manager, that awful man, he says there's a burst pipe in the main riser, and the mold is systemic. They're condemning the whole floor for remediation. I have nowhere to go. I'm standing here with my life in a duffel bag, and I don't know who else to call." I felt that rush of protective adrenaline. I told her to breathe, to stay calm. I said, "Eleanor, don't worry. Call Mark. We'll figure this out. You aren't going to be on the street." I expected her to thank me, but she just made this low, whimpering sound and whispered, "I don't want to be a burden. Maybe I'll just find a motel, a cheap one. I'll be fine with my coat and the space heater." By the time Mark called me 10 minutes later, he was already in his car. His voice was thick with that specific kind of panic a son feels when he thinks his mother is suffering. He told me, "Maya, she's distraught. She's crying so hard she can barely speak. It's only for 2 weeks, maybe 3 tops, while the city clears the building. I'm going to pick her up. Are we okay with that?" I looked around my beautiful, silent office. I looked at the guest room down the hall, which was currently serving as a storage space for my fabric swatches and half-finished canvases. I thought about being a good woman, a good wife. I told him, "Of course, Mark. It's family. Bring her home." When they pulled into the driveway 4 hours later, I was standing on the porch. The air was starting to turn crisp, that early autumn chill that makes you want to wrap yourself in wool. I expected to see Eleanor looking disheveled, maybe tear-stained. Instead, she stepped out of Mark's SUV looking remarkably composed in a beige trench coat, her pearls perfectly centered. Mark was behind her, struggling with 4, not 1, but 4 massive hardshell suitcases. She walked up the steps and took my hands in hers. Her palms were dry and papery, and she smelled of Chanel No. 5 and something faint, like stale cigarette smoke, even though she claimed to have quit years ago. She looked me in the eye and said, "You are a saint, Maya. Truly. Most girls these days wouldn't open their doors to an old woman. I've always said you had a generous spirit, despite your modern sensibilities." I didn't quite know what to make of the modern sensibilities comment, so I just smiled and led her inside. For the first few days, it was actually pleasant. Eleanor was a whirlwind of helpfulness. I'd come down in the morning and find the dishwasher emptied. Not the way I liked it. The mugs were all facing the wrong way, but emptied nonetheless. She brought in these gourmet cheeses and expensive bottles of wine, filling our fridge with things we usually saved for special occasions. She'd sit at the kitchen island while I worked, her iPad in front of her, clicking away at something. She'd look up and say, "You know, Maya, this kitchen is lovely, but the flow is all wrong for a woman who actually cooks. You have the prep station too far from the sink. If I were you, I'd consider a full island extension. I have a few sketches I've been working on for you. Just thoughts from someone who's managed a real household for 40 years. I'd just laugh it off and say, "Thanks, Eleanor, but we're still paying off the first renovation." She'd just hum a low, vibrating sound in her throat and go back to her clicking. The first real flicker of unease, the first true red flag, didn't happen until the end of the first week. It was a Sunday evening. The house felt crowded. Eleanor's things had begun to migrate. A pair of her shoes in the mudroom, her heavy wool throw over my linen sofa, her bottles of expensive, clinical-smelling moisturizer lined up on the bathroom vanity. We were finishing dinner, a pot roast she had insisted on making, though she complained the entire time that my pots were inferior aluminum. As I started to clear the plates, Eleanor cleared her throat. It was a sharp, performative sound. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table toward me. Not Mark. I opened it, thinking it was a grocery list or maybe a contact for a plumber she'd found. Instead, I saw a typed document. At the top, in a bold, formal font, it read, "Property Management and Utility Offset Invoice." I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the line items. Professional culinary services, $300. Interior design consultation and layout optimization, $250. Household logistics and organization, $250. Total due, $800. I looked at the paper, then at Mark, who was suddenly very interested in the dregs of his red wine. Then I looked at Eleanor. She was sitting perfectly upright, her hands folded on the table. I said, "Eleanor, I don't understand. What is this?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a thin, tight expression. She said, "Well, dear, I've been observing how much time I'm spending maintaining this home. Between the cooking, the cleaning, and the professional advice I've been providing on your renovations, I've essentially taken on the role of a live-in manager. In the real world, that's a salaried position. However, since we're family, I'm willing to credit my services against the rent I'm sure you're dying to charge me. This invoice is simply the balance of what you owe me for the value I've added to your life this week." I felt a cold prickle of sweat at the base of my neck. I said, "Value? Eleanor, you're our guest. We're putting you up for free because your apartment flooded. We aren't charging you rent, so why on earth would you charge us for emptying the dishwasher?" Her expression shifted instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound, wounded dignity. She looked at Mark, her bottom lip trembling just a fraction. She said, "Mark, honey, I told you she'd see it this way. She thinks I'm just a charity case. She doesn't realize that my time and my expertise are assets. I am occupying the master suite, which, by the way, has a very drafty window that I'll need to have fixed, and I am providing a service. It's only fair that we have a professional arrangement. It's for your protection as much as mine." Mark finally looked up, his face flushed. He didn't look at me. He looked at the table. He said, "Maya, maybe she has a point. I mean, she has been doing a lot around here. And she did give us those design ideas. maybe we just pay the $800 this once to keep things simple? It's just a formality, right, Mom? Eleanor nodded, her eyes welling with unshed tears. She said, exactly, a formality, to ensure I feel like a contributing member of this household, and not some beggar you've taken in off the street. I stood there, holding a dirty plate, looking at my husband and his mother. The silence in the room wasn't the peaceful, sanctuary silence I'd loved a week ago. It was heavy. It was suffocating. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. And for the first time in that house, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I looked down at the invoice again. $800. It wasn't about the money. It was the way she typed it. The way she'd anticipated my rejection. The way she was already moving her things into the master suite, which I realized now she had already occupied while I was at work that afternoon. I didn't say anything. I just walked to the sink and started the water. I let it get scalding hot, the steam rising up to hide my face. I could hear them whispering behind me, the low, urgent murmur of Eleanor's voice and Mark's soft, placating responses. I realized then that the 2 weeks Eleanor had promised wasn't a timeline. It was a countdown, and I had no idea what was actually ticking. The next morning, I woke up early before the sun, hoping to catch that 6:15 a.m. piece. But as I stepped into the hallway, I saw the door to the master suite, our room, which she'd maneuvered us out of under the guise of her bad back, was wide open. The light was on. I crept toward the kitchen, but stopped when I heard her voice. She wasn't crying. She wasn't wounded. She was laughing. I stayed in the shadows of the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Eleanor was on her cell phone, standing by my marble island, pouring a glass of the expensive orange juice I'd bought. She said into the phone, "Oh, it's easier than I thought, Joyce. Mark is a sweetheart, completely pliable. And the girl, well, she's exactly what I expected. Emotional, insecure. I've already sent the first bill. She'll pay it. They always pay when they think they're being noble. I'll have the whole place sorted by the holidays. No, the apartment is gone, I told you. I'm never going back to that dump." She paused, listening, and then let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Rent? No, darling. I'm not paying rent. I'm charging it." I retreated into the darkness of the hallway, my breath coming in shallow hitches. My sanctuary was gone. The woman in my kitchen wasn't a victim of a burst pipe. She was a predator who had just found a new hunting ground. And she was using my own husband as the bait. I walked back to the guest room, closed the door as quietly as I could, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my laptop and opened a new search tab. I didn't search for how to help a mother-in-law. I searched for public records, Eleanor Vance. The blue light of my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the guest room, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls I'd painted a calming sage green just last summer. Now, that green looked sickly, like stagnant pond water. It was 3:14 a.m. The house was deathly still, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I used to crave. It was a heavy, expectant silence, like the air right before a massive oak tree cracks in half. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly as I typed Eleanor's full name into the county's public records portal. I felt like a spy in my own home, a traitor to a family bond that Eleanor had already set on fire. The first thing I found wasn't a burst pipe or a condemnation notice. It was a civil filing from 3 months ago, a final eviction notice for a property on Sycamore Street, Eleanor's condemned apartment. I clicked the PDF, my breath catching in my throat as the document loaded pixel by agonizing pixel. There it was, laid out in cold, legal font, non-payment of rent for 6 consecutive months. Total arrears, $12,400. There was no mention of plumbing issues, no emergency remediation, just a woman who had simply stopped paying her bills and waited for the law to catch up with her. I leaned back, the plastic of the desk chair creaking under my weight. She had lied. She hadn't been forced out by a disaster. She had been hunted out by her own debts. But that didn't make sense. Eleanor had a pension from her years as an administrator, and she always talked about her diversified portfolio. Where was the money going? The next morning, the sun felt aggressive, poking through the blinds like an intruder. I waited until I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of Mark's boots heading out the door for his 8 a.m. meeting. I heard his car pull out of the gravel driveway, leaving me alone with her. I waited another 20 minutes, listening to the muffled sounds of the morning news blaring from the master suite, the room that used to be mine. Eleanor liked the volume high. She said it helped her block out the hum of the house. I walked toward the front door to check the mail, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached the mailbox just as the carrier was pulling away. Inside, nestled between a hardware store circular and a light bill, was a thick cream-colored envelope addressed to Eleanor Vance. It was from the United States Postal Service, an official confirmation of a change of address. I felt a sick lurch in my stomach as I peeled back the edge just enough to see the contents. She hadn't just forwarded her mail for a 2-week stay. She had registered our address as her permanent residence effective 4 days before she even arrived. She had planned this move-in while she was still crying on the phone about her emergency. I heard the master suite door click open. I shoved the envelope into the waistband of my leggings, covering it with my oversized sweater, and grabbed the hardware circular just as Eleanor rounded the corner. She was wearing a silk kimono, her hair perfectly coiffed, holding a silver tray with a single crystal glass of water and a lemon wedge. She looked at me, her eyes tracking the movement of my hands. She said, "You're up early, Maya. I was hoping you'd sleep in. You've looked so haggard lately. It's that freelance work, isn't it? It's not a real career, dear. It's just giggles and sketches. No wonder you're always so high-strung." I forced a smile, feeling the sharp corner of the hidden envelope digging into my hip. I told her I was just checking for a delivery. She hummed that low, vibrating sound again and walked toward the kitchen. As she passed, I noticed something on the kitchen counter, a small leather-bound ledger I hadn't seen before. It was tucked behind the flour canister. I waited until she went into the backyard to commune with the hydrangeas, and I pounced. I opened the ledger. It wasn't a diary. It was a logbook, page after page of dates and dollar amounts. April 12th, $1,200. May 15th, $1,200. Beside each entry was a name. Sarah, Aunt Sarah, Mark's aunt, the one Eleanor hadn't spoken to in 3 years because of some vague disagreement over Sunday dinner. I grabbed my phone and ducked into the pantry, the smell of cinnamon and stale crackers surrounding me. I dialed Sarah's number, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. Sarah picked up on the third ring. Her voice was cautious, weary. She said, "Maya, is everything okay? It's been a long time." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I whispered, "Sarah, Eleanor is living in our house. She told us her apartment was condemned, but I found an eviction notice for non-payment. I found a ledger in her things with your name in it. What happened 3 years ago?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. I could hear Sarah take a deep, shaky breath. She said, "Maya, get out of the house. If she's there, you need to be very, very careful." Eleanor didn't stop talking to me because of a dinner argument. She stopped talking to me because I caught her. She stayed with me for 4 months after she sold her house. She told me the money was tied up in escrow. While she was under my roof, she opened 3 credit cards in my name. She drained my emergency savings. When I threatened to call the police, she told the rest of the family I was suffering from early onset dementia and that I was confused about my finances. She's a parasite, Maya. She doesn't just stay, she consumes. My blood went cold. I asked her, "Where did the money go?" "The house sale, your savings, where is it?" Sarah's voice dropped to a jagged whisper. "I don't know. She has this obsession with looking wealthy. She spends it as fast as she steals it. Check your accounts, Maya. Check Mark's accounts. She doesn't work alone. She uses people's love for her as a skeleton key." I hung up, the silence of the pantry suddenly feeling claustrophobic. I needed to see our bank statements. Mark and I had a joint account for the mortgage and utilities, but we kept our personal savings separate. I sat down at the kitchen island, my laptop open, and logged into the joint portal. My eyes blurred as I looked at the transaction history. Withdrawal, $50. Withdrawal, $100. Withdrawal, $75. All from an ATM at the Golden Oaks Country Club. Over the last 7 days, nearly $600 had vanished in small increments. Mark didn't play golf. Mark hadn't been to Golden Oaks in years. I felt a surge of heat, pure, unadulterated rage, climb up my throat. I pulled up our credit card portal. There, under the Authorized Users tab, was a name I hadn't added. Eleanor Vance. Mark had given her a card. He'd given her a key to our future without saying a single word to me. I couldn't stay in the house. I felt like the walls were closing in, the very air thick with Eleanor's Chanel No. 5. I grabbed my car keys and shouted toward the backyard that I was heading to a print shop. I didn't go to the print shop. I drove straight to the Golden Oaks Country Club. It was a sprawling estate of manicured lawns and white-gloved service. I parked my beat-up SUV between a Mercedes and a Porsche, feeling like an intruder in my own life. I walked toward the outdoor patio, the sound of clinking silverware and polite laughter drifting on the breeze. And there she was. Eleanor was sitting at a central table, surrounded by 4 women in expensive linens and oversized sunglasses. She looked radiant. She was holding court, a glass of sparkling rose in her hand. I stood behind a large potted palm, close enough to hear her voice over the soft jazz playing on the speakers. She leaned in, her voice theatrical and loud. She said, "Oh, it's a sacrifice, truly. Living with them is a challenge. Maya is so disorganized, poor thing. I've had to take over the entire management of the estate just to keep their heads above water. I'm essentially their benefactor at this point. I even had to lend them money for the mortgage this month. But that's what mothers do, isn't it? We give until it hurts." One of the women clucked her tongue in sympathy. "You're too good, Eleanor. They're lucky to have you. Most young couples would be lost without that kind of guidance." Eleanor sighed, a long, dramatic sound. "Well, I just hope they appreciate the professional rates I'm charging them. It's the only way to teach them responsibility. Now, who wants another round? This one is on me. My son insisted I use his black card for my trouble." She didn't have a black card. She had Mark's mid-tier travel rewards card, the one we were using to save up for a trip to Italy for our 5th anniversary. Every clink of her glass was a mile of that trip evaporating. Every laugh was $1 stolen from our renovation fund. I didn't confront her there. I couldn't. My throat was too tight, my mind racing through the implications of what Sarah had said. She uses people's love as a skeleton key. Mark wasn't just being a good son. He was being farmed. I drove home in a trance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled like rosemary and roasting chicken. Eleanor was in the kitchen, wearing one of my favorite aprons, the one my mother gave me. She looked up and smiled, that sharp, predatory glint back in her eyes. She said, "There you are. You missed the delivery man. He brought those new bar stools I ordered for the island. I put them on the card, the one Mark gave me for household essentials. They're velvet, Maya, so much more sophisticated than those wooden stools you had. You can thank me at dinner. I looked at the bar stools. They were deep navy velvet, completely clashing with everything I'd built. They looked like thrones. I felt a text vibrate in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was from Mark. Hey babe, Mom told me you were feeling a bit stressed about the money thing. I increased her limit on the authorized card just for this month, so she can help with the house logistics. Let's not fight about it tonight, okay? She's doing so much for us. Love you. I looked from the phone to Eleanor, who was humming a tune as she basted the chicken. She caught my gaze and winked. She didn't just move in. She was colonizing. And as I looked at the velvet stools, I realized I wasn't just losing my house. I was losing my husband to a woman who had turned motherhood into a high-stakes con game. I walked past her without a word, heading straight for the basement stairs. I needed to see the electrical panel. If she was going to play the live-in manager, it was time she learned that managers have to deal with real emergencies. But as I reached for the basement door, I noticed a small, black device plugged into the outlet near the floor. It was a Wi-Fi extender. But when I looked closer, I saw a tiny pinhole lens. A camera. She wasn't just watching the house. She was recording me. I stood there, staring into that tiny glass eye, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. She wanted a professional arrangement. Fine. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. I was going to audit her entire life. And I was going to start with the condemned apartment that didn't exist. I looked directly into the camera lens, smoothed my hair, and whispered, I hope you're getting my good side, Eleanor, because you're going to want to remember exactly what I looked like before I took everything back. I heard her stop humming in the kitchen. The silence returned, but this time it was mine. I went into my office and locked the door, the cream-colored envelope from the USPS heavy in my pocket. I had the move-in date. I had the eviction. I had the management invoices. Now, I just needed to find out where she was hiding the body of the life she'd murdered before she came for mine. The air in the house had changed. It wasn't just the smell of Eleanor's heavy perfumes or the constant, low-frequency hum of the television in the master suite. It was the atmospheric pressure. It felt like being at a high altitude, where every breath takes more effort than it should, leaving you dizzy and lightheaded. I spent that Monday morning sitting at the kitchen island, the one now flanked by those hideous navy velvet bar stools, clutching a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. I was waiting. I knew the moment I stopped being the quiet, compliant daughter-in-law, the mask would slip entirely. I heard the master bedroom door click open. Eleanor didn't walk. She glided. She appeared in the kitchen wearing a fresh silk robe, her eyes scanning the counter for any sign of disorder. She looked at my cold tea, then at me, and her lip curled just a fraction of a millimeter. She said, Maya, dear, you're brooding again. It's so detrimental to the energy of the home. I've been meaning to tell you, I've scheduled a deep clean for the vents. They're filthy. I'll add the coordination fee to this week's management invoice. It's only an extra $200. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I said, the vents are fine, Eleanor. I checked them last month. And about that invoice, I won't be paying it. In fact, I've canceled the authorized user card Mark gave you. I noticed the household essentials you've been buying include $300 lunches at Golden Oaks and silk kimonos. The silence that followed was visceral. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, and the sharp, sudden intake of her breath. Her face didn't crumple into sadness this time. It hardened. It was like watching a beautiful, statuesque mask turn into jagged stone. She stepped closer, leaning her hands on the marble island, invading my space until I could smell the peppermint tea on her breath. She whispered, "You think you're so clever, don't you? Prying into things you don't understand." Mark gave me that card because he knows I deserve to live with dignity after everything I've sacrificed for him. If you've cut me off, you aren't just attacking me. You're attacking his wishes. You're being a very, very small person, Maya. I stood up, pushing the velvet stool back with a harsh scrape against the wood floor. I told her, "I'm the person who pays for this floor. I'm the person whose name is on the deed. You're a guest, Eleanor, one who lied about why she's here. I know about the eviction on Sycamore Street. There was no burst pipe." She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. She just tilted her head and gave me a look of pure, chilling pity. She said, "A burst pipe is a metaphor, you simple girl. My spirit was being drowned in that place. I moved here because my son invited me. And as for the deed, we'll see how much that matters when the family finds out how you've been treating a displaced, elderly woman in her time of need. I've already started the record. Maya, every word you say to me is being documented." She turned and walked away, her silk robe fluttering behind her like a battle flag. 10 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate on the counter. It didn't stop. It was a relentless, rhythmic buzzing that felt like a swarm of hornets. I picked it up. A group text message. The header read, "Family support and unity." Eleanor had added Mark, his sister Claire, Aunt Sarah, which was a bold move, and 3 cousins I hadn't spoken to since our wedding. The first message was a photo. It was a picture of Eleanor sitting on the edge of the guest bed, looking small and fragile, holding a single piece of toast. The caption read, "I hate to be a bother, but I feel I must share the reality of my situation. Maya has officially cut off my access to food funds. She told me this morning that I am a parasite and that she wants me out on the street. Mark, honey, I know you're at work, but I'm frightened. She's been screaming about the money. She thinks I owe her for staying in this drafty room. I've never felt so unwelcome in my own son's life." My thumbs hovered over the screen, my heart hammering. I typed, "This is a complete lie. Eleanor, you were at a country club yesterday spending hundreds on our credit card. I asked you to stop charging us for management fees." Before I could hit send, a message from Claire popped up. "Maya, what the hell? She's 68 years old. Even if she's being difficult, you don't cut off a woman's food. This is elder abuse. Mark, are you seeing this?" Then Mark's name appeared. "Maya, please. Not now. I'm in a meeting with the partners. Just give her the card back. We can talk about the country club tonight. You're making me look like a monster in front of my whole family." I threw the phone onto the sofa. I felt like I was screaming underwater. This was the gaslighting, the slow, deliberate twisting of reality until up was down and theft was dignity. The rest of the day was a psychological war of attrition. Eleanor didn't stay in the master suite. She moved into the common areas, but she didn't speak. She performed. Every time I walked into the kitchen, she would flinch, visibly pulling her shoulders in, as if she expected a blow. If I opened a cupboard, she'd hurry out of the room with a whimpering, "Sorry, I'll get out of your way." At 3 p.m., I went to my office to try and get some work done. I found the door locked from the inside. I rattled the handle, my frustration boiling over. I shouted, "Eleanor, why is my office locked?" Her voice came from the other side, muffled and trembling. "I'm just securing the house, Maya. You said I was a manager. Remember? I'm protecting the company assets. You're so volatile today, I didn't think it was safe for the equipment to be left unattended while you're in one of your moods. I'll open it when Mark gets home and can mediate." I pounded on the door. "It's my equipment. My office. Open this door right now." I heard the distinct click of a camera shutter from inside the room. She was taking photos of the door shaking. She was building a portfolio of my instability. I backed away, my chest heaving. She wanted a war? She wanted high tension? Fine. I sat on the floor in the hallway, my back against the wall, and I started a recording of my own. I pulled up my email and saw a new message from a sender I didn't recognize. eleanorv_consulting@protonmail.com. The subject line was formal notice of tenant rights and fee schedule. The email read, "To the occupants of the primary residence, please be advised that as a resident of more than 7 days with an established mailing address, I am now legally a tenant at will under state law. Any attempt to lock me out, restrict my access to common areas, including the kitchen and laundry, or terminate my management services without a 30-day written notice will be met with legal action. Furthermore, please see the attached invoice for emotional distress and hostile environment surcharge, totaling $1,500 for the period of October 10th to 12th. Payment is due by Friday. Failure to pay will result in a lien against the property's equity for services rendered." I read the words over and over until they blurred. She wasn't just a squatter. She was a professional. She was using the very laws designed to protect vulnerable people to hijack our life. When Mark finally walked through the door at 6:30 p.m., the atmosphere was radioactive. Eleanor didn't give him a chance to put his keys down. She fell into his arms, sobbing, real shuddering sobs that sounded like a wounded animal. She gasped out, "She's been pounding on the doors, Mark. She's been screaming at me all day. I had to lock myself in her office just to feel safe. She's obsessed with the money. She wants to throw me out in the cold. Look at my hands, I'm shaking." Mark looked at me, and for the first time in our 5 years together, I saw a flicker of genuine resentment in his eyes. He said, "Maya, enough. I saw the texts. I saw the photos she sent of you banging on the door. What is wrong with you? It's just money. It's just an $800 fee. Why are you making her life a living hell?" I felt a coldness settle over me. I said, "Mark, she's charging us for the privilege of her staying here. She's using your card at country clubs. She's forging an identity as our manager to gain legal tenancy. Look at the email she sent me. She's threatening a lien on our house." Mark took the phone from my hand, his eyes scanning the email. I waited for the realization to hit him. I waited for the, "Oh my God, you're right" moment. Instead, he handed the phone back and sighed, a long, defeated sound. He said, "She's just scared, Maya. She's been evicted, she's lost her home, and she's trying to feel like she has some control. This fee stuff, it's just her way of feeling useful. She told me she'd use the money to pay for the new vents and the kitchen island. She's reinvesting in our home. Why can't you see that?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the man I'd built a sanctuary with. He was a child being manipulated by a master. I realized then that I couldn't win this by arguing logic with a man who was under a spell. I said, "Fine. If you want to pay her, but I'm going to spend the night at a hotel. I can't breathe in this house." Eleanor's head popped up from Mark's shoulder, her eyes dry and sharp as a hawk's. She said, "Oh, no need for that, dear. If you're leaving, just make sure you leave your keys on the counter. For security purposes. Since I'm managing the property now, I need to know exactly who has access at all times." I didn't answer. I walked to the bedroom. Our bedroom, which she had graciously allowed us back into for the night while she took the master suite, and started throwing things into a bag. My hands were steady now. The panic had been replaced by a deep, vibrating hum of resolve. As I walked toward the front door, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the family group chat. It was from one of the cousins. "Maya, we're all chipped in to help Eleanor with a lawyer if you try to illegally evict her. Don't be a monster. Just let her live her life. I stopped at the front door. I looked at Eleanor, who was now sitting on the navy velvet stool, sipping a glass of wine that Mark had poured for her. She looked like a queen on her throne. I said, "You're right, Eleanor. I am being small. I should have seen the big picture much sooner." She smiled, a slow, triumphant curve of her lips. She said, "I'm glad you're finally coming to your senses, Maya. It'll be much easier for everyone if you just accept the new order of things." I walked out into the night, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't go to a hotel. I drove 2 blocks away, parked under a dead street lamp, and pulled out my laptop. I didn't care about the invoices anymore. I didn't care about the gaslighting. I went back to the Eleanor V_consulting email. I looked at the metadata. I looked at the attached lease agreement she had sent as a threat. I zoomed in on the signature line. It was my signature, perfectly replicated from a digital design file I'd left on my desktop. She hadn't just forged a lease. She had accessed my professional design software to do it. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a felony. I spent the next 4 hours in my car, the heater blasting, digging into the digital footprint of Eleanor V. Consulting. And that's when I found the folder hidden in her cloud drive, the one labeled Project Phoenix. I clicked it open, and my world tilted. It wasn't just about our house. It wasn't just about rent. Inside were files for 3 other houses, 3 other management arrangements, 3 other families who had been systematically dismantled. And at the bottom of the list was a document titled Exit Strategy, Asset Liquidization of 412 Maple Street. Our address. She wasn't trying to live with us. She was preparing to sell our house out from under us. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes, and I realized I wasn't just dealing with a mother-in-law from hell. I was dealing with a professional ghost, and it was time I started haunting her back. The car was a freezer, the windows fogging over with every ragged breath I took. But I didn't care. The glow from my laptop screen was the only thing that felt real. I had found the Project Phoenix folder, and as I clicked through the subdirectories, the true scale of Eleanor's depravity unfolded like a poisonous flower. It wasn't just about the $800 management fees or the velvet bar stools. Those were just the opening moves of a grandmaster. I opened a spreadsheet titled Current Equity Potential, and there it was, our home address for 12 Maple Street, listed alongside 3 other properties in neighboring counties. One of them belonged to a retired couple in their 80s, another to a single mother. The third was Aunt Sarah's former residence. Beside each address was a percentage, a calculation of how much equity Eleanor had successfully siphoned off through liens and management arrears. For our house, she had a target of 40%. She wasn't just staying with us. She was harvesting us. I clicked on a file labeled Legal Framework, Maple ST. My heart stopped. It was a draft of a power of attorney document. It looked official. It looked terrifying. It was designed to give Eleanor full control over Mark's financial decisions in the event of his medical or mental incapacity. And right beneath, it was a series of forged doctor's notes, written on letterhead from a clinic Mark hadn't visited in years, suggesting a rapidly deteriorating cognitive state due to high-stress professional demands. She was setting the stage to declare her own son unfit, so she could step in as his legal guardian and liquidate the asset, our home, to cover the costs of his care. She was going to sell our house, put Mark in a facility, and disappear with the proceeds. It was so cold, so methodical, that I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. She wasn't just a mother-in-law with a personality disorder. She was a career predator who had refined the art of the familial coup d'état. I stayed in that car until the sun began to bleed through the gray morning mist, my fingers stiff from typing, my eyes burning from the screen. I had spent the night downloading every shred of evidence, the offshore bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, the forged lease with my replicated signature, the Project Phoenix master plan. I moved it all into an encrypted drive, 3 copies, hidden in 3 different locations. When I pulled back into the driveway at 7 a.m., the house looked different. It didn't look like a sanctuary anymore. It looked like a crime scene waiting for the yellow tape. I walked through the front door, the scent of expensive coffee and cinnamon rolls hitting me like a physical blow. Eleanor was in the kitchen, already dressed in a sharp, slate-gray suit. She looked like she was heading to a board meeting. She looked up from her tablet, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She said, "You're back. I assumed you'd spend the morning looking for apartments. Mark is already in the shower. He's very disappointed in your behavior last night. Maya, he's starting to agree with me. This environment is becoming quite toxic for his recovery." I walked right up to her, ignoring the toxic comment. I felt a strange, icy calm. I said, "His recovery from what? Eleanor, the imaginary cognitive decline you've been documenting in those forged doctor's notes, or the stress of his mother trying to steal his home." The smile didn't just vanish. It evaporated. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine alarm in those hawk-like eyes. She set the tablet down on the marble counter with a sharp clack. She whispered, "I don't know what you think you've found, but snooping into my private business is a violation of the management agreement you signed. You're overstepping, Maya, and you're making it very easy for me to prove your instability." I leaned in, my voice low and steady. I told her, "I didn't sign a management agreement. I'm a graphic designer. Eleanor, I know exactly how you used my software to replicate my signature. I also know about Project Phoenix. I know about Sarah's savings. And I know about the offshore account where you've been hiding the proceeds from your last 3 relocations. The game is over." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at me, her face a mask of absolute frozen malice. Then she did something that made the hair on my arms stand up. She laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. She said, "You think a few files on a computer are going to stop me? I've been doing this since before you were born. You little amateur. Mark won't believe a word you say. To him, you're the jealous wife who can't stand her mother-in-law. To the family, you're the abuser who tried to starve an old woman. By the time you try to explain Project Phoenix, I'll have already moved the equity. You're a footnote in my ledger, Maya. Nothing more." The master bedroom door opened, and Mark walked out, looking exhausted, his tie half done. He stopped when he saw us standing eye to eye in the kitchen. He looked from me to his mother, his face a portrait of agony. He said, "Maya, please. I thought you were at a hotel. We can't do this again today. I have the merger meeting this morning. I can't think straight." Eleanor was back in character before Mark could even finish his sentence. She rushed to him, her voice cracking with practiced precision. She said, "Mark, honey, thank God you're here. She's threatening me. She's saying she's going to plant evidence of crimes on my computer. She's talking about offshore accounts and things I don't even understand. I'm so confused, Mark. I think she's having some kind of breakdown. I'm genuinely afraid for my safety." Mark looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Maya, what are you doing? Why are you saying these things? My mom doesn't even know how to use a VPN, let alone manage an offshore account. You're sounding exactly like she said you would. Paranoid, aggressive." I felt the ground shifting beneath me. The gaslighting was so complete, so perfectly executed, that even with the truth in my hand, I was losing. I realized then that I couldn't win this in a private room. I couldn't win this by appealing to Mark's logic because Eleanor had already poisoned the well of his trust. I looked at Mark and said, "I'm not paranoid, and I'm not aggressive. I'm a wife who is trying to save her husband from a woman who sees him as nothing more than a bank account to be emptied. If you won't listen to me now, you'll listen at the party. Mark frowned. What party? I smiled. And for the first time, it was my turn to be the one with the secret. I said, my 30th birthday dinner. The one Eleanor so graciously offered to manage for us this Friday. The whole family is coming, remember? The family support and unity group. I think it's the perfect time to celebrate our new professional arrangement. I've even prepared a special presentation. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She saw the trap, but she couldn't see the teeth of it yet. She said, a presentation? How lovely, Maya. It's about time you showed some appreciation for everything I've done for this family. I'll make sure the catering is perfect. It'll be a night none of us will ever forget. I turned and walked toward the guest room, my heart pounding a frantic, steady beat. I had 3 days. 3 days to turn Project Phoenix into a public execution of her reputation. I spent every second of that time in my office, which I had reclaimed by the simple act of removing the door from its hinges with a screwdriver while Eleanor was out at the club. I went through the senior relocation consultancy files. I found the names of the other families. I reached out to them, one by one. The stories were all the same. The emergency move-in, the management fees, the forged documents, the systematic isolation of the child from the spouse. 2 of the families were still in litigation. One had lost their home entirely. I sat in the middle of my office floor, surrounded by printed emails and bank statements, the smell of Eleanor's roasting chicken wafting through the house like a taunt. She was still performing, still being the doting mother, still sending those daily health updates to the family group chat about my concerning behavior. Tuesday, 8:14 p.m. Group chat. Maya spent the whole day taking the doors off the hinges. She says she doesn't believe in secrets anymore. Mark is devastated. We're just trying to get through to the birthday dinner. Please pray for us. Wednesday, 10:45 a.m. Group chat. Found Maya talking to herself in the garden. She's obsessed with some Phoenix project. I'm starting to think she needs professional help. Has anyone checked her family history for instability? I didn't reply to a single one. I let the flying monkeys of the family chatter and judge. I let the tension in the house build until it was a physical weight, a thick, greasy film over everything I touched. On Thursday night, the night before the dinner, the house was silent. Mark was working late, and Eleanor was in the master suite, presumably finalizing her own plans for my downfall. I stood in the kitchen, staring at that tiny hidden camera she had plugged into the outlet. I knew she was watching me on her phone. I picked up a glass of water and raised it toward the camera in a silent toast. I whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch it, "Tomorrow night, Eleanor, the big reveal. I hope you picked out a good outfit. It's going to be your last night in this house." I heard a chair scrape in the room above me, the sound of a door slamming. I went to bed and slept for the first time in a week. I didn't dream of sanctuaries or hardwood floors. I dreamt of fire. I dreamt of a phoenix that didn't rise from the ashes, but was consumed by them. The morning of the party, the air was heavy with the smell of rain. Eleanor was a whirlwind of activity, directing the caterers she had hired with Mark's money, arranging white lilies in every room, flowers for a funeral. She didn't look at me once. She was the picture of a gracious hostess, a woman who had already won. But as I watched her adjust the management and utility ledger on the coffee table, making sure it was visible to the guests, I felt a surge of pure cold adrenaline. I had the encrypted drive in my pocket. I had the statements from the other victims. And I had a secret recording of our conversation from Monday morning. The one where she admitted Mark was pliable, and I was a footnote. I looked at the navy velvet stools. I looked at the white lilies. And then I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like the girl who was scared of a phone call. I looked like a woman who was about to burn her own house down just to make sure the monster inside had nowhere to hide. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m., a sharp, mechanical chime that felt like the starting gun of a race I'd been training for in the dark. I stood at the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister so hard the wood grain bit into my palm. Down in the foyer, the house was a stage. Eleanor had transformed my sanctuary into a museum of her own ego. The scent of white lilies was overwhelming, thick and cloying, like a funeral parlor trying to hide the smell of decay. She was down there, radiant in a champagne-colored silk dress that probably cost more than my first car, purchased, no doubt, on the household essentials card. I watched her greet Mark's sister, Claire, with a theatrical embrace. Eleanor's voice carried up the stairs, brittle and sweet. She said, "Oh, Claire, thank you for coming. It's been such a trying week, but I wanted to make sure Maya's 30th was special despite, well, the atmosphere has been so heavy." Claire whispered something back, her eyes darting toward the stairs, looking for me with a mixture of pity and judgment. I could feel the weight of the family support and unity group chat pressing down on the house. I wasn't the birthday girl tonight. I was the patient in the asylum, and Eleanor was the benevolent head nurse. I walked down the stairs slowly, my black dress swishing against my legs. Every step felt intentional. As I entered the living room, the conversation dipped, then resumed at a forced, higher pitch. There were 12 of them, the inner circle of the Vance family. Aunt Sarah wasn't there. She was the crazy one Eleanor had successfully excommunicated years ago. But the cousins were there, the ones who had called me a monster. Mark stood by the fireplace, looking gray and diminished, a glass of scotch clutched in his hand like a life preserver. Eleanor glided toward me, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She handed it to me with a smile that was all teeth. She said, "Happy birthday, Maya. I've taken the liberty of arranging a little program for tonight. After the main course, I'd like to say a few words about family and the responsibilities we have to one another. I think it's a lesson we've all been learning lately, haven't we?" I took the glass, the bubbles tickling my nose, and looked her straight in the eye. I said, "I couldn't agree more, Eleanor. I think tonight is going to be incredibly educational for everyone." Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, my table, serving the roast chicken with the grace of a queen. She dominated the conversation, weaving a narrative of her struggles with the condemned apartment and her joy in being able to help us manage our disorganized lives. She'd lean over to a cousin and whisper, "You have no idea how much dust was in those vents. It's a miracle they weren't sick." I've had to be quite firm about the maintenance schedule. Mark barely ate. He kept looking at me, waiting for the explosion he knew was coming, but I gave him nothing. I sat there, a polite smile plastered on my face, sipping my wine and watching the clock. 8:15 p.m., the time she usually sent her nightly update to the family. As the plates were cleared, Eleanor stood up, tapping her spoon against her glass. The room went silent. She looked around the table, her eyes moist with practiced emotion. She said, "I want to thank you all for being here. As many of you know, this hasn't been an easy transition. When I lost my home to that disaster, I was heartbroken. But being here with Mark and Maya has shown me that family is the only true currency. However, family also requires structure. It requires respect for those who have come before us. I've spent the last few weeks trying to bring that structure to this house, to act as a manager, a consultant, and a mother. It's been met with resistance, great resistance, but I believe in transparency." She reached down and picked up the leather-bound ledger, the one she'd been using to track her fake fees. She held it up like a holy relic. She said, I've prepared a summary of the value I've added to this home and the debts that have been incurred. I think it's important that we all understand the professional nature of a shared household. Maya, dear, I know you have a presentation too. Why don't we see yours first? I'd hate to overshadow your little birthday project. She sat down, her face glowing with the smug satisfaction of someone who thinks they've trapped a mouse in a corner. Mark looked at the floor. Claire sighed audibly. I stood up. My heart was a drum, but my hands were steady. I said, Thank you, Eleanor. You're right. Transparency is exactly what this family needs. I did put together a presentation. I wanted to show everyone what Project Phoenix looks like. I walked over to the TV in the living room, which was connected to my laptop. I hit play. The screen didn't show photos of my childhood or our wedding. It showed a high-resolution scan of a document. The senior relocation consultancy agreement Eleanor had forged. The room went quiet, a different kind of quiet. A heavy, confused silence. I pointed to the signature at the bottom. I said, This is my signature, except I didn't sign it. I'm a graphic designer, as Eleanor loves to remind everyone. I tracked the digital metadata on this file. It was created on my computer using my licensed design software at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday while I was asleep. It was created by someone using the administrative login, Eleanor V. Eleanor's smile faltered, just for a second. She said, Maya, really? Technical jargon to hide your debts. It's embarrassing. I didn't stop. I hit the next slide. It was a map of the county, with 4 houses highlighted in red. One was our house. Another was Aunt Sarah's. The other 2 belonged to families I'd contacted over the last 48 hours. I said, This is Project Phoenix. It's Eleanor's master plan. She doesn't just move in because of maintenance emergencies. She moves in to identify equity. Here are the bank statements from Sarah's account from 3 years ago. Notice the withdrawals. They match the ATM at the Golden Oaks Country Club. The same club where Eleanor spent $600 of our mortgage money last week. A murmur went around the table. Mark looked up, his brow furrowed. Maya, what are you talking about? I looked at him. Mark, I love you, but you've been blind. She wasn't paying for vents. She was building a case to have you declared mentally unfit. I clicked the next file. The audio started playing automatically. It was the recording from the kitchen. Eleanor's voice, crisp and clear. Mark is a sweetheart, completely pliable. And the girl, well, she's exactly what I expected. Emotional, insecure. I've already sent the first bill. She'll pay it. They always pay when they think they're being noble. The recording continued, Eleanor's laugh echoing through the living room. I'll have the whole place sorted by the holidays. I'm never going back to that dump. I'm not paying rent, darling. I'm charging it. The silence in the room was now absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Eleanor was frozen, her hand still hovering over her wine glass. Her face had turned a mottled, ugly purple. Claire was the first to speak. She looked at Eleanor, her voice trembling. Mom, did you actually say that? Eleanor didn't look at her daughter. She looked at me, and the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She stood up, knocking her chair backward with a violent crash. She screamed, You little bitch, you think you can humiliate me in front of my family? After everything I've done, I'm the only one who keeps this family together. Mark is a failure who can't even manage his own wife, and you're a common thief who stole my privacy. I stood my ground. I said, I didn't steal your privacy, Eleanor. I audited your fraud, and I'm not the only one who's watching. I hit the final slide. It was a live feed of the hidden camera she'd hidden in the kitchen. Then I pulled up a series of emails from the other families, the ones she'd ruined. I said, I've spent the last 3 days talking to the people you destroyed. They're all on a conference call right now, listening to this. And so is the local police department's fraud division. That was the breaking point. Eleanor lunged for the laptop, her fingers clawing at the air, but Mark stepped in front of her. He didn't do it gently. He caught her by the arms, his face a mask of horror and realization. He whispered, "It's true. Everything she said. You've been stealing from us. You've been lying to me about being sick. You were going to take our house." Eleanor thrashed in his grip, her voice rising to a screech that didn't sound human. She shouted, "It's my house. I earned it by raising you. You owe me everything. That girl is nothing. She's a stranger. I'm your mother." She turned to the rest of the family, her eyes wild, looking for an ally. She cried out, "Help me. She's attacking me. She's faking the tapes. You know me. You know I'd never do this." But the flying monkeys were gone. The cousins were looking at their plates, the shame of their own gullibility finally sinking in. Claire was crying, her head in her hands. No one moved to help her. No one spoke up for the displaced, elderly woman. The front door opened. I had called them 20 minutes ago. 2 police officers stepped into the foyer, their boots heavy on the hardwood. The blue and red lights from the cruiser outside strobed through the linen curtains, slicing through the room like a blade. One of the officers said, "We received a report of a domestic disturbance and a filing for identity theft and forgery. Is there an Eleanor Vance here?" The room went deathly still. Eleanor stopped struggling. She looked at the officers, then at the family, then finally at me. The hatred in her eyes was so pure, it was almost beautiful. She said, "You think you've won? You've destroyed your own family tonight, Maya. You've broken Mark's heart. You'll be alone in this house with nothing but your hardwood floors and your spite." I walked over to the front door and held it open. The cold night air rushed in, clearing out the suffocating scent of the lilies. I said, "I'd rather be alone in a house I own than live in a palace with a ghost. Get out, Eleanor, and take your velvet stools with you." The officers escorted her out. She didn't go quietly. She spent the entire walk to the car screaming about tenant rights and management arrears, her voice fading into the distance until the only sound left was the rain hitting the porch. I walked back into the living room. The family was starting to filter out, heads down, avoiding my gaze. Mark was still standing by the fireplace, his glass of scotch shattered on the hearth. He looked at me, his eyes red and hollow. He said, "Maya, I'm so sorry. I didn't see. I just wanted to be a good son." I looked at the house, the sanctuary we'd built, now littered with the wreckage of a war. I said, "Being a good son doesn't mean being a victim, Mark. And being a good wife doesn't mean letting a predator sleep in my bed." I picked up the leather-bound ledger from the table and tossed it into the fireplace. The paper caught instantly, the blue flames licking at the forged signatures and the fake debts. I watched as Project Phoenix turned into ash, the black soot rising up the chimney and out into the night. The fallout was just beginning, but for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The air was cold, the house was empty, and the lilies were dead. But the deed was still in my name. The silence that followed the police car's departure wasn't like the silence from before Eleanor arrived. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air in a room after a fire has been put out, thick with the smell of scorched earth and chemical foam. I stood in the center of the living room, my feet still planted on the hardwood, watching the last of the family support and unity group filter out the front door. They didn't look at me. They slunk out into the rain like shadows, their coats pulled tight, leaving behind half-eaten plates of roast chicken and the cloying funeral scent of those white lilies. Mark was the last one left in the room. He was sitting on one of those navy velvet bar stools, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with a rhythm I had never seen from him. It was the sound of a man's worldview collapsing. I walked over to the windows and pulled the linen curtains shut, blocking out the lingering red and blue flashes of the neighborhood's curiosity. He finally looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and raw. He said, "I let her do it, Maya. I didn't just let her in. I handed her the matches. Every time you tried to tell me, I chose her version of the truth because it was easier than admitting my mother was a monster. How do we even look at this house the same way again?" I didn't have an answer for him yet. I just looked at the velvet stool he was sitting on. I grabbed the edge of the fabric, the soft, expensive pile that felt like a bribe, and I tipped it over. It hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud. I told him, "We start by getting the poison out. Every single thing she touched, every improvement she made, every logistics change. It goes. Tonight." We didn't sleep. We spent the next 6 hours in a fever of purging. It was a physical exorcism. We dragged those velvet stools to the curb, letting the rain soak into the navy fabric until they looked like drowned animals. I went into the pantry and swept every gourmet jar of truffle oil and imported tapenade she'd bought with our money into a heavy-duty trash bag. The glass shattered inside the plastic, a satisfying, jagged crunch. I stripped the master suite of the silk sheets she'd insisted on, the clinical-smelling moisturizers, the silver trays. By 4 a.m., the curb in front of 412 Maple Street was piled high with the ruins of Eleanor Vance's management. The sun rose on Saturday morning, pale and watery. I stood in the kitchen, my hands stained with the soot I'd scrubbed from the fireplace where the ledger had burned. I opened my phone. The group chat was dead. Not a single message since the police arrived. But I had a new email. Not from a consulting address, but from a legal firm. The subject line read, Vance versus Vance, emergency injunction. I read it out loud to Mark as he sat at the empty island, a cup of black coffee between his hands. "Please be advised that Eleanor Vance has filed for an emergency stay of eviction, citing tenant at-will protections and claiming elder abandonment. She is also requesting a temporary restraining order against Maya Vance for targeted harassment and digital defamation. Do not attempt to dispose of her remaining property." Mark didn't flinch this time. He didn't defend her. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out his own phone, and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. It was the family's longtime lawyer, a man who had known Eleanor for 30 years. Mark said into the phone, "Bill, I don't care what she's filed. I'm sending you an encrypted drive. It contains audio recordings of her admitting to fraud, forged documents of my own mental incapacity, and evidence of 3 other families she's defrauded. If she tries to step 1 foot back on this property, I want her arrested for felony identity theft. Tell her if she drops the injunction, I might not testify at her bail hearing. But she has 1 hour to decide." The silence on the other end of the line was long. Then Bill sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. He said, "Mark, I've seen some of what she's been up to. I tried to warn your father years ago, but he wouldn't listen. I'll relay the message. I don't think she realizes you've actually grown a backbone." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of a victim, but the cold, hard hope of a survivor. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers and restoration. We hired a professional deep cleaning crew, the kind that handles biohazards. I told them I wanted the scent of Chanel No. 5 gone from every fiber of the carpet, every vent, every corner of the master suite. I spent my afternoons repainting the walls. I chose a bright, stark white, a gallery white. I wanted a blank canvas. I wanted to see the light hit the walls without being filtered through her modern sensibilities. The flying monkeys started to reach out eventually. It started with an email from Claire. She wrote, "Maya, I've seen the full files Mark sent over. I'm sick to my stomach." I gave her $3,000 last month, because she said you were holding her pension hostage. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know she's gone. She's moved into a state-subsidized studio across the county. She's telling everyone who will listen that we've stolen her twilight years, but no one is picking up her calls anymore. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I didn't reply. Some bridges are better left burned so you can see where you're going. The transformation wasn't just in the house. It was in me. I noticed it about a month later. I was standing in my office, the door now firmly back on its hinges, but the lock was one I had installed myself. I was looking at a new design project, a rebranding for a local nonprofit. My hands weren't shaking. My mind wasn't racing toward the next red flag. I realized I didn't jump when the floorboards creaked anymore. I didn't check the hidden camera app on my phone every 10 minutes. I had deleted the app, and I had personally ripped that Wi-Fi extender out of the wall and smashed it with a hammer in the driveway. Mark came into the room, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He looked better. The grayness in his skin had been replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. He sat down in the guest chair, the one she'd once tried to claim as her consultation seat. He said, "I saw her today, Maya, in the supermarket. She didn't see me. She was at the checkout counter, trying to use a coupon that had expired, arguing with the teenage cashier about her status in the community. She looked small, just a bitter, lonely woman in a beige coat. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the urge to help her. I just felt nothing, like she was a stranger I'd read about in a sad book." I took the glass from him. I looked out the bay window at the hydrangea bushes. They were dormant now, waiting for the winter to pass, but I knew they'd come back stronger in the spring. I said, "That's the liberation, Mark. It's not the restraining order or the police reports. It's the moment they lose their power to make you feel anything at all." He nodded, leaning his head back against the wall. "She sent me a text this morning, from a new number. She said she's considering writing a memoir about familial betrayal, and that she'll need a copy of our house deed to verify some facts for her publisher. She actually had the nerve to ask me for a consultation fee for the time she spent improving our equity." I laughed. It was a real laugh, one that started in my stomach and echoed through the quiet, white-walled room. I said, "What did you do?" "I blocked her," he said simply, "and then I deleted the message. I didn't even save a screenshot. She doesn't get to be a part of my digital footprint anymore." We sat there in the silence, the real silence, the sanctuary silence. It wasn't the silence of secrets or the silence of things unsaid. It was the sound of a house that belonged to the people living in it. The aftermath of Eleanor wasn't just a story about a bad mother-in-law. It was a story about the price of peace. I looked at my bank account that night. The $800 invoices were gone, but the money she'd stolen through the authorized card was still a hole in our savings. We'd be working for a year just to get back to where we were before she knocked on the door. But as I stood in my kitchen, my bare feet pressing against the cool marble of the island, watching the moon rise over the suburban trees, I realized I'd never been wealthier. I had my home, I had my husband, and I had the absolute, unwavering knowledge that I was the kind of woman who could stare down a monster and tell it to leave. I picked up the last of the white lilies, which had finally wilted into a brown, papery mess in the corner of the dining room. I walked them out to the compost bin in the backyard. As I dropped them in, I felt the cold night air hit my lungs crisp and clean and free of Chanel No. 5. I walked back inside, locked the front door, and turned off the lights. The house settled with a gentle creak, a sound of wood and stone and memory. I wasn't a footnote in anyone's ledger. I was the architect of my own life. And as I headed up the stairs to the master suite, my room, my bed, my peace, I knew that no matter who knocked on that door in the future, the answer would always be the same. My sanctuary is not for sale, and the rent for my peace has already been paid in full.